Oh, don't applaud. That makes it hurt more. I just want to check. You know this is Showgirls, right? Yeah. Good evening, folks. My name is Jesse Wente. I'm the director of film programs here at TIFF Lightbox. You may remember me from such movie series as Bangkok Dangerous, the films of Nicolas Cage, or Whoa, the cinema of Keanu Reeves. And tonight, in the nadir of my programming career, I admit that I am also the person responsible for Flesh and Blood, the films of Paul Verhoeven. Yes. This was the night I was dreading when we decided to do this series. You know, I think Paul Verhoeven is a fascinating filmmaker who's had a rather remarkable career and spans, European art cinema to Hollywood blockbusters, and spans movies of real transcendence and beauty and movies like Showgirls. It's interesting in our history at Lightbox, Verhoeven is one of the more requested series retrospectives we've had, which is an intriguing fact in and of itself. It means you people are really weird. And so, we were really eager to do it, and particularly because, as I'm sure you are evidence of, there has been a rather dramatic critical rethinking of many of Verhoeven's movies. There he is. He heard my original review of this movie back when it came out. And so, it seemed like a very appropriate time to put together this retrospective, and in particular when I found out that my good friend Adam Nayman had authored a book with what I assume is an ironic title called It Doesn't Suck, Showgirls. And we thought it was a great chance to have Adam here launch this book, which I urge you to read. It's a very well-written, fascinating sort of critical look at the movie. And now I'm going to call him on his BS. So please welcome author Adam Nayman.
So just like a brief exercise in object recognition, the pink thing outside is the book. People may have been like, what's the pink pamphlet? Does it have to do with Showgirls? That is the book, and it will be there afterwards as before, and then on shelves unless they decide to take it off. But yes, I did write this book on a film that I definitely think doesn't suck. If you haven't seen the movie, the level to which saying that something doesn't suck can be a compliment may not be evident to you yet. But once you've experienced some of the dialogue in Joe Esterhazy's screenplay, you'll know that I mean it as a very, very high compliment to a movie that I think has stood the test of time in an interesting way. Like, Showgirls is not old enough to vote or drink in Canada yet. It's only 18 and a half years old. I guess it can vote. It can't drink, thank goodness. It's only 18 years old, but the turnaround critically on this movie has been amazing. It is not like I'm the first crazy person out here. The first person maybe crazy or stupid enough to write a book, but I'm building on something that I think Jesse rightly said, which is that Verhoeven is a director whose work is often reevaluated, where the responses sort of change to it with time. And because you cannot have a worse response to a movie than Showgirls got, it kind of makes sense that the turnaround would be the biggest of all his movies. But that's something else I would sort of ask us to consider when we're watching the film, is that you have a movie like RoboCop, which rightly gets really good reviews because they're like, look at this is sarcastic, it's outrageous, it's playing with genre. Basic Instinct comes out, people say the same thing. And for some reason, when Showgirls came out, people who are paid to evaluate and understand movies suddenly go, oh no, wait, this is bad for some reason. Even though it's something that is made, I think, very much in line, very in the spirit of stylistically, tonally, thematically, similar to not just the movies he made in America, but the movies he made in Holland. So one of the things that I think is worth talking about in the book, and one of the things we can maybe talk about after this very long movie is over, is why it was so easy in the mid-90s for everyone whose job it is to look at movies, to look at this and say, this is the nadir, to use Jesse's word, and why now, 18 or 19 years later, it's sold out. with a very sympathetic audience of people who would consider reading a book, or maybe at least not burning a book, about Showgirls. And that, more than any kind of silly yes, no, great, bad, masterpiece garbage, is I think what the book is about and what's worth talking about with Showgirls.
So, quick survey for Adam and I. How many of you have not seen Showgirls before? Holy shit. Wow. Now I really feel bad.
There are probably about as many people here as saw the film on its opening weekend. Because as we know, the media never has a history of piling on and deciding things are bad because they don't make money, right? And I think one of the reasons that Showgirls was such a big target is you have two numbers that shouldn't go together. You have 35 million, which is the budget, and you have NC-17, which is the rating. If you make a $35 million movie with an NC-17 rating, that's not just fuzzy math. Like, that's a very bad idea. I think that Showgirls was a really, really big target. It's a movie that's being released into a very conservative cultural climate. It is, I would argue, the last big major American film, maybe outside of Eyes Wide Shut, that takes sex as its actual subject, its surface, its texture, its content, not something that just kind of happens in the film. And since North American adults, especially Americans, are so mature and so not uptight and so not screwed up in their attitudes towards sexuality, you know, of course Showgirls was not treated horribly wrongly, which I think it was. I think it was a movie that came out at the exact wrong time. And this is now maybe kind of the right time for us all to take a deep breath, realize you don't have to laugh at something because there's nudity in it, and maybe try and take this movie a little bit seriously. I think it deserves to be taken at least a little bit seriously.
So Adam, for the virgins,
yeah,
in the audience, one thing they should look out for in the movie.
Well, one of the things that I tried to write in the book, and it's kind of like walking on eggshells, is the fact that I'm arguing that this is a movie that is mostly funny and tacky and outrageous on purpose because it's made by a very smart person and written by a very clever screenwriter. But what the tension in the movie that's so amazing is I don't think the lead performance is very good. I think that, and the fact that that one more time. For the fact that gets a laugh is very telling, because I think that when you rehabilitate Showgirls, to some extent you're doing it at the expense of Elizabeth Berkley, which is a very bad feeling as a critic. What I would say is that whatever this movie is, whether you tend to think that it's a really kind of misunderstood borderline masterpiece or a really atrocious movie or something totally abject, I would argue it is what it is more because of her than really anything that Paul Verhoeven did or that Joe Esterhazy did. And I would say, if we're asking for something to look for while watching the film, I find her performance very moving. And I'm not being funny. You have a film about a young woman who comes to Las Vegas to get into showbiz, who's willing to sort of who's willing to put herself through whatever, willing to be manipulated, willing to be talked down to, willing to be exploited. And I think you find a real allegory of that in Berkley's actual casting and in Berkley's actual performance. The difference is that, spoiler alert, this character gets to fight through some of the things that are being done to her, whereas I think Elizabeth Berkley was left to take the rap, really, for how much everybody hated every aspect of Showgirls. I don't think she gives a very good performance, but I think she gives kind of a heroic one. I think that she's easy to make fun of, but I'm very moved watching her in the film. And whatever I think Showgirls is, whatever lasting endurance it has, a lot of it has to do with her, and it's not just as simple as saying that she's bad. So that's one thing for us to watch for. But we can talk afterwards about all the many things about this movie that are very good, like the way it's made, the way it's scored, the way it's cut, the way it's written, all things that film critics at the time couldn't seem to pay attention to, but which seem pretty evident to me now. I hope that at least like what, 50% of you agree would be good when we're done.
So I urge you to get Adam's book. It's on sale in the TIFF shop. Stick around after the show for more discussion of the movie. I'm going to go drink my sorrow away. Enjoy the film, folks. Thank you, Adam.
Please welcome back Adam Nayman.
It kind of sucks that I missed the first half of the film just now, but I remember it pretty well. So,
I imagine.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to open up to the audience pretty soon, but I wanted to start with a question for Adam.
Sure.
It's maybe about the dark turn towards the end of the film.
Sure.
And how much do you think that had to do with the negative response to the film?
Well, I mean, I think there's different kinds of negative response to the movie. I basically would say that there's a lot at the beginning of the film that is easy to laugh at, and I think the film encourages that. It's a question of whether you're laughing at it or with it. But I have a friend in Montreal, and I was talking with her about the film. She's a huge fan of the movie to the point where I almost felt kind of responsible for, like, she's the kind of person I'm writing this book for. And she probably won't mind that I'm saying this in front of a group of people who don't know her. But she says that when she watches the film, she doesn't want to watch that part because it really complicates the kind of campy, ironic enjoyment of the movie. I mean, that scene's not fun, that scene's not funny, that scene's not campy. I believe it's very much of a piece with kind of what's serious and what's real about the movie around it. There is so much violence and hatred and misogyny that is latent in the way that this show business world is depicted and the way this exploitative world is depicted. And Verhoeven is a director whose films always erupt. They always kind of overstep and exceed their boundaries to some extent. I think a lot of people who have reclaimed the movie in an ironic way, like this is just dumb, this is bad, this is so bad it's good, they have a hard time with that scene because it's unpleasant, it's not fun, it's not easily recouped under that banner. But to me, it's one of the keys to the film. It indicates, if you'll pardon my language, but we just sat through Showgirls. I mean, the movie's not fucking around at that point. It's not a particularly subtle point that's being made, but to me, it's not much different than some of the imagery Kubrick gets towards the beginning of Eyes Wide Shut, where you have this fancy society party, and then upstairs there's this hooker ODing in the bathroom, and it violates this sense of fantasy or this sense of the upper class enjoying themselves and partying. And it's very, very similar to a scene in Verhoeven's film Spetters, which, much like Showgirls got him kind of kicked out of Hollywood more or less in '95, is a movie that got him kicked out of the Netherlands. There was actually an anti-Spetters committee, largely because of this very violent gang homosexual rape scene in that movie, which is just as key to what's been latent and kind of unpleasant going on at the beginning of Spetters, as I think this scene is to what goes on in Showgirls. I like that it complicates the ironic, let's all laugh and clap and be happy with ourselves for liking this bad movie response to Showgirls. I think in its way, even though it's a part of the movie people have the hardest time with, it indicates that the movie is actually driving at something and that there is serious, that there is serious intent there. It's not the only example, but I think it's a very strong one.
And there are a lot of people here who actually were seeing it for the first time. Maybe you can talk about your first time seeing it and your response.
Well, like most 14-year-old boys, I was desperate to see it. Why it got 0 stars in the Globe and Mail. That was why I went to see it, because when I was a teenager, the most unwholesome thing I was doing was, reading film reviews. And I was really interested to see why this film, by a director who even at 14, I figured kind of had a sense of humor and a pretty good track record, had gotten such a bad review. And I was very sympathetic to the movie from the very first time from the very first time that I saw it. And one thing that I should say is that even though I wrote a book on this, and it's the first book, and it seems like kind of a stunt to do the book, I mean, it's not, and there are so many other critics at the very high end and then kind of at the lower end who've been in a process of reclaiming this movie sort of almost since it came out. One of the things I talk about in the book is that Jacques Rivette, a director who might seem to fit more normally within the confines of the TIFF Bell Lightbox, it's Rivette who got the ball rolling on Showgirls being reclaimed. He did an interview with a French magazine where the interviewer said, so what have you seen that you've liked lately? Did you see Starship Troopers, he asks him. And Rivette said, yeah, Starship Troopers is pretty good, but Showgirls is amazing. He said, Showgirls is the one movie that shows America for what it is. He says that it's the movie that holds a certain mirror up to that society. I mean, he went on and on and on in this interview. And it's interesting that it took a kind of egghead French auteurist who literally practiced both criticism and filmmaking at the beginning of the idea of auteurism in the French New Wave to 40 years later sanction this movie and make it safe on the one hand for Film Quarterly, which is an academic magazine, to do a symposium on it, and to almost sanction a lot of these kind of camp screenings or silly screenings or funny screenings of the movie. It's funny now that the opinion on the film has really turned around. You would have a harder time finding a piece written in the last 5 years that doesn't like the movie than one that does. My book is almost like a tiny bit late to the party in that respect, which is why I'm synthesizing the work of a lot of people who kind of came first. So I'm not the only crazy person. If you think I'm crazy, I'm building on even braver and faster crazy people than myself.
Okay, I think we can open up to the audience now. If you just raise your hand, we'll pass a microphone to you so we can hear you.
Hello. I have 2 questions in one statement.
That's a good ratio. I like that.
Let's see if I remember. When was the first time you saw it when it was released in 1995, right?
Yeah, sorry, Mom and Dad, I snuck in.
Did you know that it was either the Harvard Raspberry Review or the Yale, they gave the award for worst film?
Yep.
And did you see that clip? He actually appeared and accepted the award.
Because Paul Verhoeven, I think, is a lot more secure in what kind of a pervert and megalomaniac he is than a lot of filmmakers. He did show up to the Raspberries and took the award with good humor, which is hard for him because he's a director who's always driven towards success. The thing about Verhoeven is that I don't think winning a Raspberry is a kind of ironic victory for him. I think it hurts. He had a lot of commercial success in Holland, and the success he had in the States cannot be overstated. RoboCop, Total Recall, especially Basic Instinct, these were giant hits. One of the things I argue in the book is that Verhoeven has an awful lot of hubris. He's a director who pushes people's buttons, he pisses people off, he does things his own way, and both in Holland and Hollywood, he's kind of been punished for it. And people took a lot of pride and a lot of pleasure seeing this high-rolling, pervy European guy get punished when Showgirls failed. I think one of the reasons Showgirls failed so badly is that he wasn't slapped on the wrist for Basic Instinct. Basic Instinct is a movie that everybody hated and still made $400 million. And he wasn't going to get away with doing that again when he did, when he made Showgirls with the same screenwriter and an even more outrageous set of characters and story points than Basic Instinct. I think he swallowed a lot of pride by accepting that Raspberry, but I also think it's to his credit. And I think he said something at the award, I quote it in the book, I don't have the exact quote in my head, but something like, people thought that my films were stupid and terrible and depraved in my home country, now I kind of feel like I'm still at home in the United States. So, yeah.
I have many statements or questions I could make about this movie, but I'll try and boil it down.
I'll give you my home number.
To start off, my dad was the one that first showed me Paul Verhoeven movies when I was a kid. He said these were very important films for me to watch, and I want to thank him for that. But Showgirls was a movie that he didn't want to show me, but he did own on DVD. And I always felt like, ooh, this movie isn't for me. But one day I picked it up and I decided to watch it, and I feel like I've become a better person because of it.
That story has such a happy ending.
It does, and now I'm here appreciating it on the big screen for the first time, which is great.
The ending gets even better. What is there a question?
There is a question, of course. The one, now you may not be able to answer this, so
Probably
I've got
not.
further ones afterwards. But the main thing that I've always been curious about in this movie is at the end of the film when she's beating up Andrew Carver and she's got these bright red nipples.
Right.
The battle nipples, as I like to call them.
A scene that Quentin Tarantino ripped off in Inglourious Bastards, and that the girl with the dragon tattoo has elements of.
One
as
of
well.
many scenes Quentin Tarantino has ripped off. Yeah. But I've never noticed that before. You probably have more insight in the film than I do, so I don't know if you might know why that is, that she has these battle nipples.
Well, no, I mean, it's a good statement, but I think that you answered your own question. I mean, that whole sequence has to do, I mean, when she talks about showtime, she's obviously getting kind of dressed up and ready to go. She's putting on a front. I mean, what I like about that scene is that this dancing that she does in the movie, which I think one critic described it as like Elaine Bennis's full body dry heave set to music on Seinfeld. But to be serious about it, her body in that scene, and I write about it, becomes very weaponized. And all of this dancing that seems to have not really gotten her anywhere, all of a sudden just kicks the absolute shit out of this misogynist, racist,
it's very aggressive
sexist
dancing.
asshole. Like it's a great moment where her dancing is really something that she's doing with real intent, and she's kind of doing it on behalf of something other than her own stardom. But I love that scene where she's getting ready, because we've seen all through the film different iterations of these women getting ready, putting on these costumes, getting ready for battle. Even though they're very scantily clad, it takes a lot of effort to get themselves to look like that. They're putting on an awful lot of stuff for how little they're wearing. And I think that sequence that you're describing is the ultimate example of that. Another line in that I really like, I mean, you can say whatever you want about Joe Esterhazy. I don't mention this in the book, but I should have. When he says, "I want to see you topless," and she says, "You should see me bottomless," that's an incredible line. When you actually think about what the other possible connotation of bottomless is in terms of whatever her rage and her contempt or her sense of shame is when she's talking to this person. And because there are so many lines in Showgirls that arguably cut in a couple of different ways, like even Nomi's name being No Me, meaning she has no sense of self, or just as easily No Me, like she wants to be a star more than anybody else. You start seeing these things in the dialogue and sort of at least questioning and wondering, well, if that one seems purposeful and poetic, what about the others? So that line about "you should see me bottomless," I've seen this movie like maybe 6, 7, 8 times in the last year in order to write this book, and that never occurred to me until just now, and I'm wishing that I'd noticed it before.
There's something that I find that every time I watch this movie, there's a little new thing I gain every time, something I've never noticed before, and I find that there's not a lot of other movies that
You and I
with.
lead equally rich lives, sir.
Hi, yes. I'm just curious about what you would say regarding Elizabeth Berkley's performance, or a defense of that, or a rereading of it, insofar as, for me, I view the movie as a comedy because I feel like we've had a more recent story that is the story of an innocent going from a corrupted individual in, say, something like Breaking Bad, where we have Bryan Cranston, who's a very powerful actor. And for me, Showgirls, it feels like Breaking Bad if you had Gilligan from Gilligan's Island in it, where it just seems...
Berkley breaks pretty bad. At times in this movie. But again, I sort of said it off the top, which is one of the things I say in the book is a thought experiment, and the ages don't quite work, but bear with me because it's late. If you had cast Alicia Silverstone in this film, who when she made Clueless was a really capable comedian, a really good actress, I still think she's a good actress, she might have played this part better, or some other actress might have played this part better. And if I believe that it's a well-written, well-directed, certainly well-made movie, which to a large extent I do, you could argue, well, it would take the worst element out of the movie and kind of just make it good, and then maybe everyone wouldn't have had to hate it. But this is such an extreme and such an outrageous and such a strange and such an unsettling movie. I think it is all of those things because of Berkley. And without her being kind of bad, or without her performance being kind of erratic, or without it feeling like she's kind of been manipulated into giving this weird performance the way Nomi is manipulated and manipulating herself into giving this weird performance in her career, I don't know how much the film would have. And it is an outlier in Verhoeven's career because whatever else you think of him, his films in the Netherlands and the States tend to be exceptionally well acted, especially when the acting is stylized or caricaturish. Like the performances in RoboCop aren't realistic, but they're incredible. And the performances in Starship Troopers, no one laughed at those. They seem to understand that like Casper Van Dien and Denise Richards were being cast for a reason, maybe because there's more than one of them who are acting that way in the movie. But in this film, Kyle MacLachlan and Gina Gershon, like these are expert actors, and they know what they're doing. Gershon especially, like she's amazing in this film. And to see them being so amazing while Berkley is kind of confused and flailing around about what she's doing, it kind of fits what's going on in the story. As much as I admire Verhoeven as an artist, I think it's very mean. I think it's very, very tough to kind of get your head around while you're watching it. I don't think that they would be screening Showgirls, much less any idiot would write a book about it, if it hadn't been for Elizabeth Berkley. So she's kind of the key to this movie being amazing, even though I don't think it's very good acting. I hope that that makes sense. I try and talk about that at some length in the book, and I'm trying to be compassionate about it because, man, people took shots at her when the movie came out. And you know, it doesn't mean you have to lie and say it's a superb performance, but it's enough. It's better to consider like what the performance means than just be the 100th person to say she's terrible. Because a lot of other actors are terrible and they don't get nearly the flack that she did.
Just like to thank Adam for his
Brad,
book and for coming out. And it's a really great book, so I encourage you to go down to the bookstore sometime next week or this week or something and grab a copy.
If this book doesn't make enough money for the Stardust, I'm out. I'm out, so just, let that be on your conscience. Thank you, Brad.